Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive with me today?
Always.
Awesome. So, we're going to be looking at something that affects pretty much all of us,
Okay.
but we may not even realize it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's this problem of undercounting rural populations in these big global data sets.
Hmm.
You know, the kind we rely on for all sorts of things like development plans and resource allocation and, research.
Right. Yeah.
But it turns out that these data sets could be missing millions of people.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's a big deal for sure.
It is, and that's what makes this research paper we're diving into so important.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, so they basically shined a light on this problem and then dug into some potential solutions, which is great.
Yeah, getting to the why is so important.
Absolutely. So to kick things off, maybe you can give us the rundown on what the researchers were actually trying to do with this study.
Sure. So basically, they wanted to see how accurate these, five major global population data sets are.
Okay, makes sense.
But there's a twist. They decided to focus specifically on rural areas.
Ah, I see. So that's different from most of the research out there because usually they focus on urban areas.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Because those are the areas where data is easier to come by.
that makes sense. It's way more challenging to gather accurate data when you're dealing with remote villages and scattered populations.
You got it.
So how did they even measure accuracy in these, often data-deficient regions?
Well, they got creative and tapped into this really unique source of data.
Let me guess. Satellite imagery. Drones.
Nope, even better, they used reported resettlement numbers from over 300 large dam projects.
Whoa, resettlement numbers from dam projects. I would never thought of that.
Right, it's pretty clever.
But wait, how does that help measure population?
Think about it. When you have these large dam projects, they often involve resettling entire communities.
Sure.
So you have these really detailed records of how many people lived in specific areas before they were, relocated.
Oh, I see. So it's like a real-world, event-based population count, totally independent of those traditional census methods.
Exactly. And that's really valuable because census data, which is like the go-to source for these population models, well, it can be pretty unreliable, especially in rural areas.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's so many factors that could make it difficult to get a complete and accurate count in those areas.
Absolutely.
So they're using these real-world events to kind of fact-check these big data sets. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what did they find? Was the undercounting as bad as, we might expect?
To be honest, the results were pretty shocking.
Oh, no.
Yeah, all five data sets significantly underestimated rural population.
Okay, but how significant are we talking here? Give me the numbers, spill the tea.
So, the range of underestimation varied a bit.
Okay.
For example, World Pop, you know that one?
Yeah, yeah.
It underestimated by 53%.
That's a lot.
Right. And then there's GHS-POP, another popular data set.
Right.
This one was off by a whopping 84%.
84%. That
Yeah.
means they're missing almost an entire rural population in some cases.
Yeah, you got it.
That's not just a data discrepancy. That's a massive gap in our understanding of these communities.
Absolutely. And we have to remember, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
This has real-world consequences for people.
Definitely. I mean, just imagine a vaccination campaign based on data that's missing a huge chunk of the target population.
Exactly.
Entire communities could be left vulnerable.
Right.
Okay, so we've established that these data sets are seriously off the mark, but the big question is why?
Right.
Is it the methods they're using to build these models, or is it something else?
That's what the researchers really dug into.
Okay.
And they seem to think it's probably not the modeling methods themselves that are flawed.
So it's the data itself,
Exactly, like the underlying data that's feeding into these models.
which would be.
National censuses.
Ah, right, because those are often incomplete, especially in rural areas.
Yeah, and that's especially true in places that are remote or lack resources. Maybe there are language barriers or even conflict zones.
It's easy to see how getting a full and accurate census in those conditions would be incredibly difficult.
It is.
So it's like this vicious cycle. These areas desperately need accurate data to get the resources and support they deserve. But they're the very ones most likely to be overlooked in data collection.
Sadly, that's often the case.
Yeah, it's a tough situation for sure. But thankfully, it seems like the study doesn't just point out the problem.
Yeah.
It actually digs into some potential solutions, too.
Yeah, we need answers, right?
We do. So what are some of the things we could do to start filling this data gap?
Well, they emphasize that investing in accurate rural censuses is super important.
Sure.
That's got to be the foundation.
Makes sense.
But they also suggest looking into other ways to count people, things that could like supplement the census data.
Okay, so thinking beyond the traditional census, what kind of alternatives did they have in mind?
Well, one idea is to use data from representative household surveys
Right.
because those can give us a much clearer picture at a smaller scale,
Yeah.
so we get a better understanding of individual communities within those rural areas.
Makes sense, but I'm still stuck on the idea of using data from those resettlement projects,
Uh-huh.
like the mining ones. Can you talk a bit more about that? I mean, it seems like a pretty out-of-the-box solution.
It is, and it really shows how we can use existing data in new ways.
Yeah.
Like, think about it. When you have to relocate people for these projects, you got to keep track of everyone, right?
Right.
So you end up with all this really detailed population data.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of like it's already there, just waiting to be used.
Exactly. And it's probably quite accurate, too, because it's tied to a very specific event and location.
Right, right. It makes those traditional census counts look kind of clunky in comparison.
Kind of, yeah. And they also suggest that the folks who make these data sets should, like, tweak their models so they're not so reliant on sources that might not be so reliable in rural areas.
Interesting. What kind of sources are we talking about?
Well, like satellite imagery?
Huh. You'd think that satellite imagery would be ideal for those hard-to-reach areas.
You would, but it's not always the perfect solution.
Really? Why not?
Well, it depends on the resolution and what kind of information the imagery can actually capture.
Okay.
Like, imagine a village tucked away in a dense forest.
Right. I'm picturing it.
From space, those houses might be totally hidden by the trees.
Ah, I see. So even though the image covers the area, it might not pick up on the people living there.
It's kind of like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
But the haystack is a giant forest.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's really important here, what I really want folks to take away from this,
Yeah,
is to be critical consumers of data.
I totally agree, especially when we're talking about something as important as population numbers.
Yeah.
So what are some key things we should keep in mind when we come across data, particularly when it's about rural populations?
Well, first, whenever you see a study or report that uses population data, really look at which data set they used.
Okay.
Ask yourself, where did this data come from? What are the limitations?
Right.
And if it involves rural areas, be extra cautious
Yeah.
because the data set they choose can massively impact the results of the study and any decisions that are made based on those results.
So even if there are all these numbers and stats, it doesn't necessarily mean those numbers reflect reality, especially for rural communities.
Nope, not always.
It's all about asking the right questions and recognizing that data, well, it represents real people's lives.
It does.
And that's not something we can forget.
Definitely not. And, understanding those nuances, especially when it comes to something like population data, can really change how we approach issues like, resource allocation and development.
For sure. Yeah, it really hits home that data isn't just some, like, abstract thing,
Right.
It has a real impact on people. And when you consider just how big this undercounting problem could be, it makes you wonder about, like, the even bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if we're consistently undercounting rural populations all over the world? Does that mean our global population figures are wrong too?
It's a really interesting question.
Right. It could mean that we're working with, like, inaccurate data on a global scale.
It's possible, and that would affect so many things.
Like what?
Well, think about global resource estimates
Okay.
or sustainability projections, even our understanding of how climate change affects different populations. It could all be skewed if we're not accounting for everyone.
It's kind of unsettling when you really think about it.
Yeah.
It's like we're realizing the ground we're standing on might not be as solid as we thought.
It definitely challenges some assumptions.
Yeah, but I guess that's also what makes this research so important.
I agree.
It's pointing out a problem that needs more attention, more research.
For sure, we need to find better solutions.
So we've uncovered this huge data dilemma, and it affects everyone, even if they don't realize it.
Yeah, but the good news is, now that we know about it, we can start to push for better representation in data.
More accurate data, more equitable data.
Right, and it starts with empowering people to be more critical of the information they see, especially when it comes to things like population numbers.
Asking the right questions, demanding better data.
Exactly. That's how we can advocate for a more just and sustainable future for everyone.
And that includes those rural communities that are often overlooked.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've just scratched the surface of this issue, but hopefully it's got you thinking a little bit more about the data you encounter in your own life.
I hope so. Being informed is so important.
And if you're still curious, if there are other data mysteries you want us to explore, let us know.
We're always looking for new deep dives.
So until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the world around you.